Alright everyone, we've had a sort of breaking news from the last hour, which is that Trump has come out now and said, while the US prefers a diplomatic solution to the current fairly large-scale crisis on the Korean Peninsula, that there is the possibility of, in his words, a major conflict erupting from it, which would mean war. It would mean the inevitable reunification of the Korean Peninsula and/or Chinese involvement. We have to, though, when we analyze these things, keep a couple of things in mind, and I have an interesting theory of sorts a little bit that I'd like to talk about as well. First and foremost, the DPRK is not predominantly a threat to the United States. When North Korea comes out and threatens to nuke Los Angeles, it's not a credible threat. It may, in the future, if North Korea is left intact, it could become a credible threat. Right now, though, it's not. Their credible threats are against the South Koreans and the Japanese. The stated policy of the DPRK is reunification, believe it or not. Not nuke the world, not destroy everybody. Its policy is reunifying Korea. Unfortunately, the DPRK has it in mind that it's going to reunify Korea under Kim Jong-un's leadership, the Juche sort of model, and their mostly centrally planned economic situation with severe totalitarianism. Now, of course, the people of the Republic of Korea beg to differ and want to see it reunified under their more Western style of government, which is eventually what will happen. It's just a matter of how many people have to die before it happens and how long before it happens. Number two, this is to claims that have been made by the Trump administration regarding North Korea, putting them back on the state sponsor of terror list or something like that. I generally oppose that. That's mainly for sanction-related purposes, but North Korea's, it would be an inaccurate title. They're not a state sponsor of terrorism. They don't really have involvement with any of these militias that we see elsewhere in the world. They're far too concerned with propping up their own military. You could declare that Kim Jong-un does frequently attempt to terrorize South Korea, Japan, and now, to some degree, China and the U.S. directly. As far as actually funding guerrilla fighters or militia movements or something, I think that his regime falls short of that actual label. But I'd like to analyze something here, and I think people who are a bit younger probably don't quite get this. If you can remember the days back years ago when Kim Jong-il was, Kim Jong-un's daddy, when he was running North Korea would occasionally make an aggressive move or make a threat. But I think the reason why it's happening more now might have something to do with the same thing that allowed Trump to get elected, namely social media. The North Korean state knows that if it makes some vague threat, there will be lots and lots of people talking about it, and they can sit back and laugh a little bit as social alienation increases. The big problem is that North Korea's tendency to do that is now roughly matched by our own government in its haste to try to threaten the North Koreans and tell them, you're going to toe the line, there are certain lines you won't cross, you may have gotten away with it in the past, you no longer will. It would be very unfortunate if you were to conduct another atomic test because we're no longer going to deal with it. Chances are North Korea in the next few years will conduct another atomic test. When that happens, the US government then needs to come out and make a decision. Is it actually going to take that step towards war, which is probably what will happen, and strike their nuclear capabilities for fear down the line of them developing weapons that are far worse, that would pose a threat to the U.S., to our mainland, that would pose an even more credible and incredible threat to Japan, South Korea, China, even Russia? We have to make that decision down the road. Because right now, North Korea is still making advances, albeit slowly, with its atomic program, as well as its missile program, which is marching along faster. Most other aspects of their military are woefully outdated. As far as nuclear weapons go, for a state that small and underfunded, they've actually done pretty well. For a state that small and underfunded, their missile program is actually fairly good. It's not ironclad, it's not top tier, they don't have tens of thousands of high-tech missiles like we do or like Russia or China have, but they do have a decent program for the size and composition of their state. North Korea has, over the last few weeks, repeatedly come out and made credible threats against its neighbors and less credible threats against the United States. The Chinese have backed off now. Trump is ruling the waves around the waters off of North Korea's own territorial region, and it's clear that things are coming to a head. What's not clear is whether the DPRK will back down or not. Because in the past, any red line that was issued, they could cross it and they didn't have to worry about any repercussions that didn't involve simply sanctions. Now they have to worry about the vague possibility, at least, that we will take military action, limited or unlimited, within the region. So the situation in the Korean Peninsula is not the same as it was a few years ago when people were saying Kaesong is shut down. The North Koreans are saying that there's a state of war now that exists there, as though it hasn't continuously since the Korean War never ended back in the 1950s. It's been technically a state of war since then. When people were gathering around there a few years ago and listening to Sky King Do Not Answer on their shortwave broadcasts through the U20 site and things like that, there wasn't so much of a credible threat behind the situation, because was Obama really going to be willing to use military action on the DPRK? No. No, his stated goals, here's a red line. They cross a red line. Obama does nothing. He doubles down on sanctions that don't work. Trump is actually enforcing sanctions, considering expanding them further, floating a bunch of naval carrier groups around North Korea, and is now moving the THAAD system into South Korea, which is something, by the way, that the Chinese didn't even want us to do. The Chinese said some time ago they would be very, very uncomfy with that happening. It's clear, though, looking at China's general lack of a response to doing that, they no longer care. China has almost completely abandoned North Korea at this point. They're a sitting duck state. Kim Jong-un's days are numbered. He will probably be the last person to lead North Korea, because when he dies, it'll be at the end of North Korea existing and the beginning of a reunified Korean peninsula. I don't like war, but when you have a state that is repeatedly threatening to cause war with you, eventually you have to decide whether those threats are going to become worse and worse over time, because they're actively developing the means to make that happen. That's what's happening in North Korea. When China, a systemic and significant abuser of human rights, which routinely bullies even its more friendly neighbors like the Vietnamese, not to mention the Filipinos, the Japanese, the South Koreans, and maybe the North Korea at this point too, certainly Taiwan. When China backs off your state and refuses to help you out, even though you're doing a good job as a hermit kingdom of putting a stumbling block in the U.S. plans within a region. When China will no longer defend you, even diplomatically, you know that you've probably crossed the Rubicon. That's what's happened in the DPRK. I would not be surprised if we do see the reheating of the Korean War under Trump's presidency. I wouldn't be surprised. By the way, it won't be his fault. We can't wait around forever. Considering the aptitude that they have gained within their atomic program, it's only a matter of maybe a few years before they do have a multi-stage nuclear weapon, or the capability to put an atomic warhead on a long-range missile, which even somebody like Obama probably would have bombed them at that point. Even he probably would have had no choice but to get involved at that point. I don't even think the Chinese want that to happen. I certainly don't think Russia would be defending them. It's like a week ago. Russian and Chinese sort of monitoring ships following our carrier around, as though that was particularly abnormal. Russia flying sorties along our coast. They were doing that a couple of years ago. They've done it continuously during the Cold War. They've always been doing that. It's not even abnormal. What's happening in North Korea, though, is abnormal. Russia and China may be slightly reluctant to see a state that they can kind of, sort of, or did at one time control fall into Western hands. But the payoff for them of defending it is substantially lower now. The benefit is basically void because of all the diplomatic detriment that comes with looking like you're friendly with this regime. That is, they've threatened war against Malaysia, which doesn't have nuclear weapons. They've threatened war against Japan and South Korea, neither of which have nuclear weapons. They've threatened war with Australia, which doesn't have nuclear weapons. How many more nations are they going to threaten war against? All of these nations they're threatening are going to join in the attack when the time comes, potentially. That alone, those 4 nations combined, wouldn't even need U.S. involvement anymore. You realize how many troops, how many planes and ships that would be? They'd completely crush North Korea. U.S. gets involved, especially if China happens to do the same thing. North Korea won't even last a week in such a conflict. A lot of people would die, a lot of North Koreans, potentially a lot of damage to China, South Korea, and Japan at the same time. The Japanese are warning their citizens now. Right now, as of today, they're warning them, yeah, by the way, if you hear the siren, you may only have a minute or 2 to get to shelter. That means you get to the nearest building, you go into the basement, whatever you have to do, fucking get out of there, because every city could potentially be pockmarked with craters. And North Korea does have the capability to do that, atomic weapons aside. You fire off hundreds of missiles at another country, what do you think happens? There's a lot of damage that's done. And the artillery aimed at South Korea is even worse. The U.S. military moved its main base of operations further back from the DMZ. Why do you think they did that? Because they felt comfy with the situation? They thought that there was no chance of escalation? There probably will be escalation at this point. I think we may have gone a bridge too far when it comes to North Korea. But we can't sit by and not do anything as they develop weapons that will essentially allow them to do whatever they want within the region, because nobody will be willing to face the nuclear repercussions of standing in their way. Even a nation like, you gotta understand, here's something people need to comprehend. Things fundamentally change when a nation develops multi-stage nuclear weapons, even if it's only a very small stockpile. The way in which nuclear states interact towards one another is different from the way that they interact towards non-nuclear states. North Korea is on the threshold of having true nuclear weapons. Not primitive atomic weapons like we had in the 40s that are dropped out of a bomber. I mean real modern weapon systems. Something that's boosted, something significantly more powerful and potentially able to be fitted on an ICBM. Now, when we talk, usually, when somebody within our government or any other government proclaims, oh, somebody's going to get nukes, usually it's a total fluke. Iran or Syria or Iraq or something like that. It's just a justification for a proxy war. Because there was either never the intent or never the capability to develop those weapons. They never had the backing, they never had the resources, the money, or they were never trying in the first place, and it was all a big lie, essentially, to get us involved in some crappy-ass war. But with North Korea, they've already got atomic weapons. They've detonated a bunch of them already. So it's not a fantasy realm to suggest if they're interested in attaining atomic weapons, they must probably be interested in designing multi-stage nuclear weapons. The capability is there, they just have to work on the design a little bit. The essence of a multi-stage nuclear weapon is primarily just an atomic weapon that happens to have other material packed around it that becomes fissile material. It's capable of undergoing fission once that primary explosive explodes. The energy from that first explosion literally transforms that other material into additional fissionable material. That's what a multi-stage nuclear weapon is. Now, very few states actually have these weapons. I don't think India or Pakistan have developed them or even are particularly interested. Israel, as far as the Pentagon report, supposedly does have such weapons, although it's not clear whether that's necessarily true. There are still more primitive atomic weapons in the world. Even that, though, it packs a punch. One of those gets dropped on Seoul or Tokyo or something like that, you know, there you go. You'd probably lose 1 million lives. Especially when you consider the fallout from those older designs. You know, it's not all burning off quite as well, maybe, as a much larger weapon. I'm not sure if that's more in the realm of fantasy or common sense. But something has to be done about North Korea. We've got the U.S. president telling us, yeah, a major conflict could occur. We have the THAAD system now in South Korea. That's probably the biggest tell for the situation, is the fact that we're moving that there. Because China told us not to last year. No, don't put this in South Korea or Japan. We will be very upset if you do. But if Trump has convinced the Chinese not to worry too much about that, it must be that China's backing off North Korea and has gotten some sort of guarantor that system will no longer be in that region, you know, facing off towards China under such a situation, because the Korean Peninsula is probably going to be reunified fairly soon, and then there'll be no reason to have it there. Essentially, just, you know, just the routine anti-missile systems would exist there. That's my thought anyway. Yes, we could see the Korean War erupt again within the next year or two. It's entirely possible. In fact, at this point, I would say it's possibly more likely than not that it does. What exact form will that take? I can't answer that. It's impossible. Could be U.S. only gets involved by air and sea, you know, essentially giving support to the Republic of Korea, maybe the Japanese. It could be that our soldiers there do have to advance. It could take some other form. It could be the Chinese end up doing that on our behalf largely, and we're, again, supplying air power or something like that. Or it could be the Republic of Korea says enough of this nonsense and goes it alone. They have the capability. Their casualties would be enormous, but they could reunify the peninsula on their own. If they had Japanese backing too, it would be much quicker. But I have a feeling the U.S. will get involved when that happens. Now, will it cause World War III? No. No, if the Chinese don't feel that threatened by THAAD being in their backyard, like they were a year or two ago, it's fairly clear I don't think they're going to be getting involved in the situation against us. If anything, if they get involved at all, it'll be to go in and assassinate Kim Jong-un, get rid of him, let the regime destabilize, and then carve off maybe part of northern North Korea for themselves as a token war, you know, reward or something like that. Oh yeah, well, this province is ours now. The rest of Korea, yeah, I can reunify, it's fine. This little piece is ours because there were some Chinese tourists there at the time, and one of them got shot. So we're taking this land as compensation. And I doubt the Republic of Korea would even care at that point, honestly. I doubt they would even care if that happened. That's about all. Peace out.